would say, so that, yeah, that first image is from Michigan Women's Music Festival. It's the, I'll just say, it's the workers, kitchen, crew, downtime space, gals' living room. The women who cook for all the workers and performers. And this is the entrance to the Twilight Zone. The night after a party in the Twilight Zone is the raucous kind of SM party zone. Anything goes. This is in Fancyland, which is my friend Sasha's land in Northern California, which is this genderqueer land that she's built. It's a sleeping platform. I think I have one more. And then this is the entrance to Woman Share, which is this women's land in Northern Oregon. So quickly I will say about this project is, again, I had a strong desire to visit these places that that were born out of 70s lesbian separatism and radical politics. They're communes that separated or were birthed separately apart from other land movements. And I had a really strong desire to visit them. They were all the places I visited were turning 30 at the time. And it was never a part of my agenda to photograph the women. I was really interested in the land. I was interested in this idea of a queer landscape, and could one find in visiting these places kind of signifiers and of queerness, and I just assumed, well, of course. Wasn't even a question. I just knew that that's what I was going to do. And then I'm just going to show this other stuff, and then I'm going to say a few things about what you were saying. Yeah. So these are a series I did called Lesbian Beds. There's a bunch of these. I'm just going to show you a few. It's a very simple. I photographed the beds of women, all of who I knew in some capacity, single women and couples. And they just knew I was coming over, and they had to leave their bed the way it was in the morning, and I photographed them. For me, like, I guess I would say about the idea of the sort of documentary practice or what have you, it's like I never did street photography. So as anybody who's a photographer in the audience, like I never, like when I started art school in 1983, there's this Deborah Bright, who was a longtime chair at RISD, wrote this whole thing called the Photograph a Bum School of Thought, which is like you get your camera and you go down to Tenderloin and you take some pictures and you're doing the world a lot of good, you know? Like I just never occurred to me to do that, and I'm gonna tell you why, really briefly. When I applied for the art school in my hometown and I got the catalog, again, before the internet, and I got that catalog in the mail, in the back of the catalog was a photograph of one of my younger sisters and I at the basketball court on the corner of in our neighborhood, because we were the poor kids, and the art students would come to the Section 8 housing neighborhood that I lived in and photograph the poor kids. You know, and so it's a photograph of me. I have a halter top on, I'm all tough, leaning against the, this is a true story. So first person in my family to graduate from high school and apply to college, and I get the catalog, and I'm a piece of art in the catalog. So I go to that school. This is a good art school story, isn't it? And I take a photography class, and third or fourth class, there's a picture of my mom sitting at a bus stop in front of the fish factory she worked at with these other women. So it's this really, I think those are really important things about me that I'm sharing with you. Like, my students are like, oh yeah, I get you now. But I never, at a time when that's what people did, that's how you got your chomps as a photographer, and I actually have a lot of respect for street photography and documentary practice. It's not me. I couldn't do it. I mean, I have a longer talk where I talk about this, and it's like my indoctrination was to be the subject of art and not the artist, like from day one. And I have a lot of postmodern damage, because I went to college in the 80s, and I was a woman and a feminist and a queer, you know, real postmodern damage. Like, the burden of representation, so intense. So intense. Seriously, it still is, but can you imagine? We were talking about this, I've been talking about this with students for a few years, this idea of postmodern damage, where it's like nothing is original, nothing is beautiful. I mean, it's terrible, it's so depressive, you know? And so on the one hand, it's like, I never did decisive moment, you know? I participated in a whole sort of cultural moment with Riot Girl and Olympia, Washington, and I never documented it. You know, I get phone calls all the time from magazines. You have a picture of so-and-so? I'm like, no, I never took their picture. You know, it was sort of, we didn't do that, you know? And I think that says something about my practice. You know, I'm really interested in what's withheld and what's not being offered. I'm really interested in the primary subject and the primary object not being there, you know? It's not about avoiding, you know, it's not this way of like beating around the bush. It's really, just really comes natural to me to sort of have this more kind of open-ended sort of poetic approach. At the same time, and I've had people who want to buy this work be like, well, why did you call them lesbian beds? Why don't you just call them beds, you know? And trust me, they would all be gone had I done that. They would, you know? I guess, I mean, I could say more about that absence thing and the representation thing, but I'm really interested in those narratives of visibility where it's not all given away, I guess. And with that, I would just show these really quickly. This is just a bit of a jump, but it's such a good segue. When I had a kid. And then these next few are from this postpartum portraits that I did, which are similar, which is sort of like being a parent and being kind of stuck in the house and sort of figuring that out and just seeing these and having a relationship to it where, you know, I'm totally happy with my decision. I did it on purpose. But sort of looking at so some of the humor and what have so. I mean, so that's my kid, me. That about sums up the first year. And then this Rusty Love, you know, there's a on one side you have this like heart shape, which is a real thing that happened. A pie pan was left there. And then the dirty dishes piling up. And then my daughter's other parent, and who has a Raising Hell shirt. He has a Raising Hell shirt on. So I don't know if you want to prompt me, Anne, or you want to say things because you're talking about this image specifically, but.
I love these. You know, I often have shown some of them as I have explained the Archive of Feelings project in order to suggest the way in which the Archive of Feelings project does, in its own way, constitute a very profound response to this ongoing challenge of how to do representation. And I love the postmodern damage phrase because I also am very shaped by it. And it often causes a lot of distress for academics to figure out how can we move from critique, really picking everything apart. And I like the idea of artistic practice as, among other things, a provocation to make something, you know, make an image, even if you also stand in critical relation to so much of what's out there. That it doesn't have to be disabling or crippling. This would actually take us also into talking about feelings too. But that there is a something that can be done. And so there's that I appreciate about each of these projects that you've just shown us. And then that not having to choose, you know, not having to choose people or not people.